The political scene was heating up as the Biden administration faced mounting pressure from both sides of the aisle. The American people, already weary from years of scandal and disillusionment, were desperate for justice. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source, Pam Bondi. A seasoned political figure with a razor-sharp mind and a well-earned reputation for fierce legal battles, Bondi had just gotten wind of something that could turn the tide in a way no one saw coming. Reports had been swirling for weeks about a federal judge appointed by President Biden, who had been accused of questionable ties to left-wing donors and major political figures. The whispers were growing louder, and soon enough, the stories emerged in full force. This judge had allegedly used their power to sway rulings on high-profile cases, protecting the interests of the powerful elite while trampling on the rights of everyday Americans. The outrage from conservative circles was palpable. But it wasn't just the conservatives who were voicing concerns. The corruption allegations had even caught the attention of independent watchdog groups, prompting investigations that were beginning to look all too real. The judge's tenure had always seemed a little too cozy with the Biden administration, but now, there was proof of misconduct. As the pressure mounted, one name stood out, Pam Bondi. With Trump's unwavering support, Bondi had the political muscle to get things done, and she wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. It was clear, the judge's days were numbered. But the real question was, who would have the final say? Pam Bondi had spent the last few weeks quietly gathering her forces. Her connections ran deep, both in the media and within the halls of Congress, but she also knew this battle wouldn't be fought through traditional channels. This was bigger than politics, it was about integrity. Or, as Bondi would put it, it was about restoring the rule of law and holding those who abused their positions accountable. Late one night, after a series of backdoor meetings with key Republican lawmakers and some high-profile legal advisors, Bondi made her move. She dialed a number she knew would make a difference, President Donald Trump. "Pam, what's the word?" Trump's voice crackled over the line. It was a simple question, but Bondi knew what he meant. "The judge is corrupt," she said, cutting straight to the point. "We've got the evidence, and it's damning. But we need your backing, Donald. If we don't act now, this whole thing's going to be swept under the rug." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Bondi could almost hear the wheels turning. The stakes were enormous. If they were going to take down a sitting judge, it couldn't be half-hearted. This had to be a full-scale assault. "You've got my support," Trump finally responded, his voice firm. "But you've got to make the call. You bring the heat, Pam. I'll make sure everyone knows it's you leading the charge." Bondi nodded to herself, knowing that with Trump's endorsement, they had the firepower to move this forward. The time for whispers and rumors was over, it was time for action. Over the next few days, Bondi worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She arranged a public statement, drafted a series of legal motions, and ensured that all the media outlets were on the story. She knew it was only a matter of time before the pressure on the Biden administration would become unbearable. The final move, however, was going to be personal. Bondi was going to make the call. She would be the one to deliver the final blow. Pam Bondi's fingers hovered over her phone, the weight of the moment heavy in the quiet room. She had spent the past few days carefully calculating every step of her plan. The moment was now at hand. A single phone call could topple the political order and send shockwaves through the Biden administration. But more than that, it would send a message: the days of unchecked corruption were over. The judge's name was already becoming a household one. Rumors of their involvement with high-dollar donors and shady political maneuvering had begun to spread. Allegations of bias in key cases were the final straw. Bondi knew she needed to act fast before the story lost steam. But this wasn't going to be just another press release or quiet statement from a politician, this was going to be a full-blown exposure, with her as the spearhead. She dialed the number she had been given for weeks now, direct to the office of the corrupt judge. Her breath was steady, but her pulse quickened. She was about to take a step no one had dared to take in years. "Judge Harrison's office, how may I assist you?" The receptionist's voice was polite, but Bondi didn't hesitate. "Put me through to Judge Harrison." "This is Pam Bondi," she said, her tone sharp and decisive. There was a slight pause on the other end, followed by a quick, almost anxious, click of a button. Moments later, a familiar voice answered, but this time it was colder than before. "Pam, to what do I owe this call?" Bondi wasn't about to mince words. "Judge Harrison, I've got the evidence, your days on the bench are over. You've been compromised, and I've made sure the right people know it. You'll be out of a job before you can blink. The only question now is how quickly you want this to happen." There was silence. Bondi could practically hear the judge's thoughts racing, calculating every move. But there was no time for hesitation. This was the moment. I don't know what you're talking about," the judge stammered, his voice faltering for the first time. Bondi smirked. "I think you do. We've got the receipts. Every illegal favor, every biased ruling, every connection that you thought no one could trace. It's all coming to light. You're done." And then, just before hanging up, Bondi delivered the final punch. "Oh, and just so you know, Trump's backing me on this. He's fully on board. Your time is up." The call ended abruptly. Bondi knew that within hours, the story would break, and the media frenzy would begin. She didn't need to wait around. She had the power, the leverage, and the backing to ensure that this would become the scandal of the year. It was just a matter of time before the judge would be out of office, and with it, another victory for those who stood for justice over political corruption. The call had barely ended before the storm began to brew. Pam Bondi wasn't one to waste time, and within hours, the media was ablaze with reports of the judge's alleged corruption. The story broke like wildfire. News outlets from across the country picked up on the scandal, and social media quickly became a battleground. #Biden corruption trended within minutes, with pundits and citizens alike weighing in on the gravity of the situation. But it wasn't just the media coverage that was creating a buzz. Behind closed doors, the political machinery was grinding into action. Congress was already gearing up for hearings. The Republican Party saw this as an opportunity to capitalize on the growing discontent with the Biden administration. But it wasn't just about politics anymore, it was about exposing the system's rot. Bondi's phone didn't stop ringing. The calls were from everywhere: top Republicans, conservative legal organizations, and even a few surprise calls from moderate Democrats who had been keeping an eye on the judge's behavior for months. But the most important call came just hours later. Bondi stood in her office, pacing back and forth, when she saw the name flash across her screen: Donald Trump. She answered immediately, her nerves steely. "Pam, you've done it," Trump's voice boomed over the phone. "The media is eating this up. They can't get enough of it. But we need to keep the pressure on. Keep pushing, don't let up. The more we expose, the quicker they'll be forced to act." Bondi grinned. "I'm on it. But I need you to push the narrative, Donald. You've got the megaphone. Let's make sure this doesn't get buried." Trump's laugh echoed in her ear. "Consider it done. You've got my full support. Now, let's finish this thing. We'll see how long Biden can keep this judge on the bench." Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. The judge, once an untouchable figure in the courts, now found themselves under constant scrutiny. Calls for resignation came from all corners of the political spectrum, and even some within Biden's camp began to distance themselves from the embattled judge. The cracks were beginning to show, and the Biden administration knew they couldn't afford to let this scandal fester any longer. And then came the announcement: Judge Harrison was stepping down. The official reason was personal matters, but the truth was unmistakable. Pam Bondi had won. Her strategic moves, backed by Trump's influence and the relentless media campaign, had been too much for the corrupt judge to withstand. Bondi's message was clear: corruption at any level, no matter how powerful, would not be tolerated. But for Bondi, this victory was just one battle in a much larger war. She knew the stakes had only grown higher, and with Trump's backing, she was ready for whatever came next. The political battlefield was shifting, and she was in the thick of it. The resignation of Judge Harrison sent shockwaves through the political establishment, but the real story was just beginning. While many were quick to declare victory, Pam Bondi knew that the battle was far from over. The public had witnessed a high-profile scandal unfold, and the questions surrounding the Biden administration's ties to the judge would not fade quietly into the background. Bondi had dealt a powerful blow, but there were still consequences to be faced. In the aftermath, the headlines shifted from the judge's resignation to the broader implications of political corruption, and how far-reaching it could go. Republican lawmakers, emboldened by Bondi's success, began calling for further investigations into other federal appointees, including members of Biden's inner circle. "It's not just one bad apple," Bondi said during a television interview, her voice calm but her words calculated. "This is about an entire system that's allowed corruption to thrive, and it's time we address the entire structure." With Trump's support, Bondi continued her efforts to hold more political figures accountable. The Trump media machine worked tirelessly to amplify her message, giving Bondi a platform few could dream of. She began touring the country, making appearances at rallies, speaking engagements, and even organizing events that focused on rooting out corruption from both political parties. But it was clear that the Biden administration wasn't taking this lying down. While the president initially tried to distance himself from the scandal, he found himself facing increased scrutiny as his approval ratings began to drop. His team went into overdrive, attempting to downplay the impact of Harrison's resignation and cast doubt on the legitimacy of Bondi's claims. A few weeks later, Biden addressed the nation in an attempt to regain control of the narrative. "This is a serious matter, and we will ensure that all judicial appointees are held to the highest standard," Biden declared during a press conference. "But let's be clear, what's happening now is nothing more than a political attack from the right. This isn't about justice. This is about partisanship." But Bondi wasn't buying it. She saw Biden's response as the typical political deflection, a way to avoid addressing the deeper issues at play. She released a counter-statement shortly after the press conference, calling out the president for attempting to sweep corruption under the rug. "The American people deserve better than this," Bondi said. "This isn't about partisan politics, it's about protecting the integrity of our judicial system. And until we fix that, the American people will continue to suffer from the very corruption we've worked so hard to expose." It was clear that the issue had become much bigger than the judge. It was a symbol, a flashpoint, a reminder that corruption at the highest levels of government could no longer be ignored. Bondi had lit a fire, and whether she liked it or not, the flames were now spreading to every corner of the political landscape. The next election cycle was already on the horizon, and Bondi's influence was only growing. The question was no longer whether the judge's ouster was a one-off incident, it was about whether the political system itself could be reformed. Would the American people choose to hold their leaders accountable, or would they allow the corruption to continue? Bondi's crusade had only just begun, and the stage was set for a showdown that could change the course of American politics forever. The months following Judge Harrison's resignation were marked by escalating tensions. Pam Bondi had become a political force in her own right, a figurehead for those who believed in draining the swamp of corruption. Her rallies grew in size and intensity, and her speeches became more pointed. The narrative she had crafted was no longer just about one corrupt judge, it had evolved into a larger war against the very system that allowed such corruption to persist. Across the country, grassroots movements rallied behind her, and soon, Republican lawmakers were falling in line. Bondi's efforts were not just political, they were personal. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had seen the ugly side of power and was determined to do something about it. But the Biden administration wasn't going down without a fight. As election season approached, the stage was set for an epic showdown. Bondi had earned the ire of the administration, and Biden's camp knew that if they didn't find a way to neutralize her, the political landscape could shift permanently. The president's team doubled down on their strategy of discrediting Bondi and painting her as a partisan puppet of Trump. But Trump's backing, far from being a hindrance, had only amplified Bondi's power. His rallies, his media empire, and his base of loyal supporters all rallied behind Bondi, further strengthening her position. Trump made it clear that if the Republicans took back control, they would enact sweeping reforms to restore integrity to the judiciary, and Bondi would be at the forefront of that movement. The final blow came on the eve of the national election. Bondi had been pushing for the release of a new report, a detailed investigation into Biden's judicial appointments, with a particular focus on the ties between his appointees and wealthy political donors. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This report had the potential to bring down more than just one judge, it could bring down an entire administration. The revelations were explosive. The media picked up on the report almost immediately. Headlines blared, "Biden's judge scandal spreads, new evidence suggests widespread corruption." The political world was shaken to its core. As the public digested the findings, it became clear that this was more than just a partisan attack. The connections between the judge, Biden's donors, and high-profile political figures were undeniable. With the election looming, Biden's approval ratings plummeted. The pressure on his administration intensified, and the question was no longer if more resignations would follow, it was when. The scandal had left a permanent stain on Biden's presidency, and it was clear that the American public had had enough of corruption in high places. On election night, the results came in, and they were nothing short of a political earthquake. Republicans, fueled by the momentum of Bondi's campaign and Trump's endorsement, swept through key battleground states. Bondi herself was now seen as a kingmaker, a political powerhouse who had single-handedly shifted the tide of the election. In the aftermath, Bondi addressed the nation. Her message was clear and powerful: "Tonight, the American people have spoken. They have made it known that they will no longer tolerate corruption at any level of government. This is just the beginning. We will continue to fight for justice, for transparency, and for a government that answers to the people. Together, we will ensure that corruption never again gets to dictate the future of this nation." The Biden administration, weakened and discredited, now faced an uncertain future. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain: Pam Bondi had emerged as one of the most powerful political figures of her generation, a force to be reckoned with. And the fight against corruption was far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in American politics, one that would be shaped by those who dared to confront the status quo.